Hey everyone, and welcome to today's talk. Before we begin, let me briefly tell you about us. We at Expressia are a team of people passionate about helping others design and deliver better experiences. With our online platform, you can build data-rich customer journey maps and make your personas come alive. And do that all together with your teammates in real time. We've also got a consulting team that conducts public and corporate workshops on all things journey mapping and interviews, as well as Expressia Academy with its interactive courses, and our free community events. Our today's speaker has experience in developing and implementing CX strategies for companies in a variety of sectors, such as telecom, insurance, financial institutions, education, government, construction, and health. He was also an industry mentor for students at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in the field of customer experience. This pandemic has given him some time to try out something new, which is drawing. So without further ado, welcome everyone, the founder of CXD Labs, Saiful Nasir.
Before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners and custodian of the land that I'm on at the moment and presenting, and just to pay my respects to the elders past and present. My name is Saiful. A lot of people call me Sai, and the thing is, a lot of my guys that work with me also call me Sai. I run a boutique CX and service design consultancy, and we started to delve a little bit into product design. And essentially what we do is we help companies understand their customers and find ways to deliver experiences that what their customer expects, and sometimes a little bit beyond. And today what I wanted to talk to you guys about is about lessons that we've personally learned from the FinTech industry. Now, we've been very fortunate to be able to work with a whole raft of different types of customers. It's just that when we went into the FinTech realm, we learned something that it was quite refreshing, and it kind of readjusted the way we approach things. And these 5 lessons are core in terms of what we actually obtain from working with some of our clients that not only are in FinTech, but also deliver technology for neobanks, for example. So I spoke to 2 people during the breakout room, Stephanie and Safa. And Safa, hopefully I mentioned your name correctly. You're very new to FinTech, so hopefully what I'm covering should help people who are new to FinTech to get a little bit of understanding. Unfortunately, I can't go into the deep details. And Stephanie wanted tips, so hopefully these 5 will help. So let's delve straight into it. Now, the first thing we learned was get the basics right. Now, there are 3 things core to a lot of product and services where you just don't want to get wrong. And those are, number 1, health. So anything to do with the health sector, you really want to understand your customers and really don't want to and get that thing wrong. So get the basics right within health. Food is also another sector. So anything with agri-tech, you really want to get that sorted out. So you don't want food poisoning. It's a lot of different things that could go potentially wrong. The last one is money. Anytime you deal with money, or any industry that deals with money, they're under a lot more scrutiny than other industries. And what we found was with FinTech, getting the basics right was quite critical. And what I mean by that is there are certain patterns that FinTech needs to get right. And these patterns actually helped us to understand the full gamut of the offering from the FinTech itself. So working with a few different clients, what I mean by basics, there are certain, these patterns are very clear the moment you start unpacking them, and you can actually apply it for the industry that you're in today. So what are those 5 patterns that we saw with the companies that we work with within the financial sector and within FinTech? These were the patterns. Literally, from the customer's perspective, the jobs that they want the FinTech to be able to do and do well and get right was, how do I get my money in securely and safely? How do I get my money out securely and safely in order for me to pay? How do I maximize the money in my bank in terms of growing the money? And how do I minimize the loss? So I don't want too many fees. And how do I manage that? And last one is, how do I manage this whole ecosystem? Pretty much my funds in, out, increase and decrease. Once we looked at these 5 areas, and we actually sat down with a few of our clients, and 3 of our clients came out with the relatively same buckets. What this gave us the ability to do was, when we look at journey maps, we can actually bucket it down to these 5 different patterns. And when we look at this and we see when customers, the banking sector has a product and they want to run it through these 5 patterns, we can easily see that they need to hit certain parts, and we can improve it and use this as part of our exploratory and also come up with new innovations. And what does it mean in terms of journey mapping? What we actually did was we actually had categories and buckets where we look at the journey of a customer getting their money into the bank to start off with. And being able to hone in that focus allowed us to then start breaking up all the different features that customers really want in order to get that right. The starting point is I have cash or money I need to put into the bank. The outcome is it's in the bank, secure and safe for me to ready to use. And we applied it for all the different sectors. And what essentially happened was when we started to introduce more and more products, so they had, well, how about term savings? Well, let's run it through this. You understand which patterns actually apply. Personal loans, we can apply that to the same 5 sectors, and we can start identifying which one fits. What we also then did was we went to the product development teams, and when the product development teams came together, they know that the feature that they're working on is in pattern number 1, which is all about onboarding a customer, for example. So their journey maps that they produce was very much focused on that, and then they can align all the way through. And what happens here is that you'll get much more synergy between the people who are trying to do the product design to the designers who are actually doing the customer journey mapping, and then the development teams actually delivering the feature. So straight away, we started being able to find buckets, more what is the core basics that the customer expects to get right. Now, once you get this part done, the next part is you're going to have a flood of different ideas. When we did our journey maps with certain organizations, they had an idea log that had tons of ideas. And the problem is that when you put it on the map, it starts to get really convoluted. So how do you prioritize? How do you go about doing this? That's the second thing we learned from the fintechs, is that they got the ability to call out the 3 lenses and use this as part of their prioritization. So what are the 3 lenses? Now, if you guys come from a HCD or design thinking background, you've probably seen this before. I've got a reference on the bottom there. Check it out. Go to IDEO University and just check out some of the stuff that they've written out. These 3 lenses, people have talked about it, and it's really hard to implement properly. So what you're looking for is you're looking at what customers desire most, or what customer desires are for that particular feature for your pattern. But then you also look at what is actually commercially viable, business viable for you in order to implement. Is it cost effective? And also what's technically feasible. Now in fintech, what we found was the guys love to work on bleeding edge stuff, like things that are, you go, oh, wow, open banking coming along. Well, that's fantastic. I've got a whole bunch of different features I want to introduce, all these different APIs. And when you put it in front of the customers, they have absolutely no idea what you're talking about until you start looking at the bridge, which is what exactly do you desire most from a customer perspective? And once you marry that up, you then bring in the lens of the business and say, look, at the end of the day, we need to still operate as a business. And most businesses will have CX designers. We have that actually has profitability goals as well. And when you bring it all together, you start to flesh out all the different features that you start to see that will have the right balance of customer desirability, technical feasibility, and commercial viability. Once you put onto your map, you can actually rate this up. What we did with one particular client was we actually had a ranking system for each one of these, and based on what is the most desirable out of 10, what is commercially viable out of 10, what is technically feasible out of 10. You're bringing all the right parties along, rate it out, and you can have a very simple prioritization matrix. You can go down in the next level if you want to. Now, when we did this and we got it out to a list of innovation ideas and ideas to be implemented, there was still another level of checks that we had to do. And this actually is a quote that comes into 2, right? So the first part is treat it like it's your own money. Remember, before, fintechs are dealing with something that are quite sensitive. So when we did this, what you can do is, and we did this for not the most recent client, but one of our previous clients, is we had this principle where we printed this out and then we say, well, for that particular feature, would you pay for it? Would you promote it? And would you protect it? So whenever you run this kind of exercise as the customer voice in the room, when you're doing your journey maps and then you're looking all the different pain points and you come up with your ideas, ask the team, would you personally pay for it? Would you promote this to your mum or dad or parents or your partner or your friends? And would you protect it? What protect means is that if there's another feature that comes along, how much would you defend for it? How much would you stake your claim or your role or your vote for that particular feature? And what essentially happen is you start fleshing out. This is the applying the common sense rule for your design teams and allowing your business to also do the same. Now, when you do that, this actually will start sifting out all the different priorities that you've already done before, to the point where when you're looking at double diamond and where you start to develop into solutions, they will start formulating which solution is the more common sense part. However, when you do that and you put it onto your journey map, the second part of the quote comes in. Treat it like it's your own money, but remember, it's not yours. It's not your money. So what that means is that although you've done all these, you've done the sanity checks, you've done the prioritization of the 3 lenses, you've done all the steps before this. Remember, it's not your own money. What it means is you have to do some validation. So fintechs have a really, really cool way, well, the ones that we work with, a really good feedback loop mechanism. They have a small group of dedicated users who are early adopters that would like to provide feedback as they go along. And that's actually quite powerful. You can tap into these groups really quickly, and sometimes they're also specialist groups. So some of them are part of pattern 1, how to get money in. Some of them are part of pattern 3 on how do you reduce fees and what fees and stuff are painful to people. Remember, it's not your money, so therefore you have to validate. And the reason why you want to validate is because you start to get a better idea of customer costs versus the benefits, and also what benefits you get as a business, and also what business costs that you have to imply. So these are the kind of things that you need to get that right balance. So when you have your journey map, in a traditional sense, you can use any tools, and obviously you can definitely use your Expressia as well, but there are different tools that you can use, as long as you start highlighting the fact that there are certain elements of assumptions, what the customer goes through for all those different patterns. When you get to this stage, you've already done a lot of what is viable for the business, what is viable for the business's goals, the vision, and what the company is trying to achieve. But when you get to this stage, you start to validate with the customers. Bring some customers in, have a special interest group, especially when they can look at some prototypes and just run them through. So up to this point, you start going, okay, once you get into a rhythm of this next one is the one that I want to spend a little bit more time on. And this is the hardest part, is that they learn really fast. They move very quickly. Now, how they do that, and so many different companies have different ways of dealing with this. But the one that we saw that was the most effective is when the designer is embedded within the teams that they run through when they're developing it. So if you're a designer working in fintech, you generally work with a DevOps team, or you work with a team of other BAs or systems architects or other designers as well, and you follow the feature through all the way through. And essentially what happens is, I'm sure you guys seen this before. If you haven't, check out Eric Rice, the Lean Startup book, and check out the Lean Startup movement. You don't have to follow this. We only met, we didn't even meet a client that really followed this strictly. Some of them got to about 2 weeks, some of them were a week and a half, but mainly about 2 weeks. But what essentially we found was that all the designers went from start to finish, and even to the point where they were as part of the design part and also part of the validation part. And the benefit of that is that when you do your customer journey map, your journey map actually evolves as the product is being delivered. You're not just doing the map just for the sake of telling people what's the pain point and what's not. You actually look at what improvements have been made, and you update the map to show the improvements. And then when you look at the outcome, so any shifts in NPS, if that's what you measure, or any customer positive feedback about the feature, you bring it into the map, and then you showcase it on your journey map. So your journey map becomes a living document. What we found was that we actually implemented this for a few companies, one of them being a telecommunications company here in Australia. And what we found was that because it's such a huge beast, they wanted to get this FinTech startup model in place. And we realized there's a whole bunch of people involved in each of these stages. But what we did was we made them into smaller groups, and they were able to deliver as part of ideation. They create it and then they operate it. They design, they create it with the teams, and then they did a lot of continuous improvement and tracking. And that worked quite well. They trialed this out. Now that's what we saw in FinTech organically. So that's what we found to be quite surprising. Now I know I've flown through those 5, so I'll just quickly run down what I just went through. So the 5 lessons that we learned was we've got to get the core basics right. So it doesn't matter how fancy your FinTech product is that if no money comes into the account, it disappears because it got hacked, you already lost your customer base. You get your basics right. Call out the 3 lenses. What is desirable, what is technically feasible, and what's commercially viable. Treat it like your own money, right? Treat it like your own money. If you're delivering something that you wouldn't want to promote or you wouldn't want to pay, just don't do it. But remember, it's not yours because you need to still validate with customers. And the last one is come up with a way to get you yourself as a designer embedded into the development team so you can follow features all the way through. And that's what we saw that works really well when a designer is doing journey mapping as part of development team in FinTech. That concludes my presentation. Sorry, I went really quickly. Happy to take any questions. I don't know how it's going to work after this, but yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Sai, thank you so much for your amazing talk. Guys, if you have any questions, we have time for 1 or 2 of them, if they're like the most boring one. So feel free to send them. And we have the first question from Safa. How can we do this for complex journeys?
That's a very loaded question because complex can come into different forms. So complex could be you have multi-channels, for example. You have a variety of channels that you're trying to deal with, or you have so many products. What we did was we still went down the whole get the basics right, but then when we went down the next level, we made sure that we still did the categorization. Because essentially what we saw was some of these journeys shared some very similar customer experiences. The experiences they experienced for one particular product was very similar to another product as well. So when we started doing that cross matrix, we started to identify commonalities. The commonalities helped. So once we bundled those commonalities up, we then started doing mapping for just those commonalities. If that is still a problem, one thing that we did was we actually went back to the product and service catalog and we actually started looking at, is there a simplification project that we need to do here to simplify the actual process of the product? Because the complexity might not be because of the customer's journey. It could be because of the business itself. So that's actually another way to reduce complexity. Hopefully those 2 methods can start you off. But if you have any further questions, I have other techniques as well that I can share with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have more questions. Yeah, the other one is from Eva, and it goes like, do you cover basics in one journey map?
We ended up doing a journey map per basic. Yeah, so for each pattern, so initially we actually had a mammoth. Again, we don't have all the answers. We were experimenting with FinTech, and eventually we got to a point where we got the happy medium. We had I'm not kidding you, we have a picture of it. It was at least 6 meters, I think 6.5 meters in width. And that was just our initial brain dump, just to see where things were at. Eventually, we actually broke it down to each one of the core basic patterns. And then from there, we can break it down even further. That actually helped because what essentially happened was people wanted to use it. So they had each one of the modules printed out in their own areas, and they can actually update accordingly. So eventually we did condense it all to one pattern per map. How do you deal with different mindsets going through the journey? Every voice needs to be heard, but not every voice is important. So you got to remember that, right? You can't please everyone. However, there are mechanisms that you can use in order to deal with mindsets without offending people. Voting systems seem to kind of work for us. We actually do go down the whole voting. So you do get points and you do have the opportunity to voice, and then based on certain key things, such as, is it desirable by a customer? Really? Is it aligned with our commercial viability? Is it something that's going to be too expensive for us to implement? And is it technically viable? When you apply that, you take the objectivity measures out. So there's no real personal mindset kind of thing. You kind of try to objectify it in a sense. Hopefully that answered that one.
Yeah, and we have another one from Mahid. Firstly, a great presentation. And one of the challenges within continuous improvement in CX data, NPS, CSAT, impact assessment, fixing pain point, and cost, then how much it will return. Do you have any experience in this area?
Yeah, I don't want to eat into Rodney's time. That's a really good question. That is a huge topic. Every single engagement we've been on, we've always underestimated this piece, because every company has different data sets. Every company measures things differently, and to standardize it, to bring it to a point where people understand that the customer has their own measure. Customers don't go to barbecue saying, I picked this telecommunications company because their NPS is 80. No one talks like that. However, the measures is different for different organizations, but at the end of the day, there is a way to standardize it to make sense. Apologies. So that's not really the easiest question but happy to talk to you in LinkedIn if you want to later.
And we have time for one more. This one is from Satar. How many customer segments did you arrive at or decide to cluster into?
Okay, so that's a very difficult one to answer. So initially what we did was a lot of the customers that we dealt with had a business side. So there's a B2C and the consumer, and also a business side. So that was an easy split. But when you get down to that, it depends on what the organizational goals were. So in one organization, we split it by annual revenue and annual sales. So that's one way that they split it up. But we also then, from the consumer side, there's a whole raft of different ways that you can use. Don't know if you guys, I don't think this is a global thing. So we use the Mosaic or we use the Helix model in order to split up personas as segments, but then we align it back to the marketing segmentation as well. So you've got to if you bring the marketing teams in, they generally have their own way to segment the customers, which is quite important because your journey maps need to actually have a tangible outcome. So if the customer segmentation for marketing has a particular segment, it's good to try and leverage that. So you know that your journey map is actually making some meaningful change. Very good question. Very hard to answer in 5 seconds. So apologies.